The clock on the stove read 6:42 a.m. when I saw her, Carol. She was standing on my property, down in the lower pasture where the old willows grew, pointing. Two men in work boots stood beside her, one holding a shovel like a scepter. She wore a bright yellow safety vest over a pristine white pantsuit. A ridiculous affectation, meant to convey authority. From my kitchen window, with the first sip of coffee still warming my throat, I watched her gesture emphatically toward the head wall of the large concrete culvert that ran beneath the fence line. It was my culvert. It was my fence. It was my pasture. And Carol was trespassing again, with an audience and a purpose. I didn't move. I just watched, the ceramic mug a solid, warm presence in my hands. The morning was cool, and a light mist was rising from the very ground she was desecrating. That ground had become a marsh over the last 6 months, a stagnant, stinking bog, where once there had been firm soil and sweet grass. The roots of the willows my wife Helen had planted 30 years ago were drowning. One of them was already dead, its branches a skeletal gray against the dawn. Carol's project, her beautification initiative. She pointed again, and the man with the shovel took a step forward and plunged it into the soft earth at the mouth of the culvert. He began to dig, widening the inflow, tearing away the turf and the established riprap I had maintained for decades. They were altering the drainage profile. On purpose. I set my coffee down on the counter, the click of ceramic on granite the only sound in the quiet house. I picked up my phone, opened the camera application, and pressed record. I walked calmly out the back door, across the dew-wet lawn, my slippered feet making no sound. I stopped about 50 feet away, well within the boundary of my own yard, and zoomed in. The phone's microphone was surprisingly good. It picked up the rhythmic scrape of the shovel and the shrill, confident tone of her voice carrying on the morning air. She was explaining how this improvement would finally solve the subdivision's waterlogging issues. A noble public work she was personally overseeing. She was performing. She always was. After a few minutes of recording, I walked toward them. Not aggressively, just a steady, unhurried pace. They didn't notice me until I was about 20 feet away. Carol's head snapped around, her smile tightening into a familiar line of condescending irritation. The men stopped working, looking from her to me, suddenly uncertain. "Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with false neighborly cheer. "Up early, I see. Just overseeing a little necessary maintenance. This old pipe of yours gets so clogged, it backs everything up into our common areas." I didn't answer. I simply kept the phone up, the small red light indicating it was recording. I panned slowly from the muddy, widened ditch they'd created, to the culvert, to the two workers, and finally, to her face. Her smile vanished completely. "What do you think you're doing, Arthur? You can't record me. This is an official HOA action." I lowered the phone slightly, but kept it running. "You are on my property, Carol," I said. My voice was even. "You are on private land 100 feet past the property line. You and your workers are trespassing. You are performing unpermitted work and causing material damage to my land." She threw her head back and laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Don't be ridiculous. This is a drainage easement. It belongs to the association. We have every right to maintain it. In fact, you're the one in violation for letting it fall into disrepair. I should be fining you." She took a step toward me, puffing out her chest in the absurd yellow vest. "Now, I'm going to tell you this once. Go back in your house and let these men work. If you interfere, I will call the sheriff and have you removed. Then, I'll have the HOA's lawyer put a lien on your house for the cost of the work and the fines. Do you understand me?" I raised the phone again, ensuring it captured her face, her threatening posture. I said nothing. I just stood there, a quiet, older man in his slippers, holding a phone. She saw the placid look on my face, the utter lack of fear or anger, and it infuriated her. It wasn't the reaction she was used to. She was used to tears from old Mrs. Gable when she fined her for holiday decorations, left up 2 days too late. She was used to sputtering rage from young Mr. Chen when she demanded he repaint his front door a pre-approved shade of beige. She was not used to silence. She was not used to calm. What did she think was going to happen? She stood there on my land, which she had systematically been destroying for months, and issued threats based on a complete fabrication of her own authority. She threatened me with the law, with financial ruin, with public humiliation. She had no idea. She had no idea who I was, what I did for a living for 45 years, or what was contained in the forest green filing cabinet in my home office. She had no idea she had just declared war on the one man in a 10-mile radius who could not only prove she was wrong, but could explain it to her in excruciating, legally binding detail. She had no idea she just buried herself. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how we got here. It's important to understand the foundation of things. I've always believed that. Without a solid foundation, everything collapses. Carol's foundation was sand. Mine was bedrock. I'm a civil engineer. Or, I was. I'm retired now. For 45 years, my entire professional life was dedicated to the study of how water moves over land, hydrology, land development planning, stormwater management. I designed subdivisions like the one Carol now presided over. I wrote the drainage reports. I calculated the 100-year floodplains. I filed the plats and the easements with county clerks. I knew the rules. I knew the laws. I knew the precise load-bearing capacity of reinforced concrete and the exact shear strength of compacted soil. My world was, and is, one of deeds, surveys, ordinances, and the unyielding physics of fluid dynamics. It is a world of paper, of documentation. On paper, everything has to be right. If it isn't, things fail, bridges collapse, dams break, basements flood. I've lived in this house for 40 years. Helen and I bought it when it was the only structure on this hill, surrounded by 20 acres of pasture and woods. We raised our children here. We planted those willow trees in the lower pasture together the year our youngest went off to college. After Helen passed 5 years ago, I stayed. The quiet suits me. The house is full of her, of us. The land is part of my identity. I sold off 10 acres to a developer 15 years ago when the city expanded. That land became the Creekwood Estates Homeowners Association. My property was never part of it. I was not a member. My land was simply the old farm next door, the one that the new, neat houses turned their backs on. My property line was their back fence, and the main drainage channel for their entire development, a 36-inch concrete culvert, ran from their manicured retention pond under our shared fence line and across the corner of my lower pasture before emptying into the creek a quarter-mile away. It was all done by the book. The developer, a man I'd worked with before, did it right. He approached me, we negotiated a price, and my lawyer and I granted him a formal 20-foot-wide drainage easement, duly recorded with the county. It was a simple, clean transaction, on paper. Carol moved in about 3 years ago. She was a force of nature, one of those people who mistakes aggression for leadership. She was elected HOA president within a year, mostly because no one else wanted the job, and her bluster seemed like a kind of competence. She thrived on petty power. Her reign began with a flurry of violation notices, the wrong shade of mailbox paint, garbage cans left out for more than 12 hours, a basketball hoop visible from the street. She fined, she threatened, she cajoled. She created a neighborhood watch group that seemed to spend more time measuring the height of people's grass than watching for criminals. Most people just paid the fines. It was easier than fighting. It was just $100 after all. What they didn't realize was that with every paid fine, they were validating her authority, building her confidence, reinforcing her belief that the rules were whatever she said they were. I watched all of this from a distance. I wasn't a member, so I was immune. Or so I thought. The trouble began subtly. A year ago I noticed the lower pasture was staying soggy, longer after a rain. Then, 6 months ago, the real work started. An HOA Hired landscaping crew began clearing brush and trees around their retention pond, the one that fed into my culvert. They were expanding it, deepening it. I knew what they were doing without even asking. They were increasing the pond's storage capacity. That, in itself, wasn't a problem. But a week later, they installed a new, larger outfall structure. They had replaced the old 24-inch pond drain with a 36-inch one, matching the diameter of my culvert. To a layman, this might seem logical. Bigger pipe to match the bigger pipe. But any first-year engineering student could tell you the result. The original design was meant to detain water, to release it slowly into my culvert, so the downstream channel could handle it. By installing a larger outfall, they had effectively turned the retention pond into a funnel. Now, during a heavy storm, the water wouldn't be held back. It would surge directly into my culvert at a much higher flow rate than it was ever designed for. The water would hit the flatter grade of my pasture, lose velocity and spread out, turning my land into a floodplain. Which is exactly what happened. The first big rain in the spring turned my lower pasture into a lake. That's when the willows started to die. Carol's house, I later discovered, was at the lowest point of the subdivision, right next to the retention pond. She had a finished basement that, according to neighbors, had a tendency to get damp. By funneling the water off the common areas and onto my land more quickly, she was solving her own potential flooding problem at my expense. It was elegant in its selfishness. I did not start with aggression. That is not my way. I started with documentation. I pulled the original development plans for Creekwood Estates from my own files. I had kept a copy all those years ago. I had the drainage report, the grading plan, the easement documents. I confirmed the original pipe sizes and flow calculations. I was correct. The modification was significant and unauthorized. I began a new file, a simple, forest green hanging folder. I labeled it HOA Drainage Issue. The first document I placed inside was a copy of the original easement. The second was a photograph I took of the new, larger outfall pipe they had installed. I took several photos from multiple angles, with a date and timestamp. Then I began keeping a log. Every time it rained, I documented the water level in the pasture with photographs and written notes. I noted the dead willow and the encroaching marsh plants. I was building a record. I kept the receipts, so to speak. My first attempt at a resolution was a polite letter. I sent it to the HOA board, addressed to Carol as president. I introduced myself, cited my professional credentials, explained the technical details of the unauthorized alteration, and described the resulting damage to my property. I included copies of the relevant pages from the original drainage report. I proposed a simple solution. They restore the outfall structure to its original, approved design. I requested a response within 30 days. I sent it via certified mail. I put the signed receipt in my green folder. The response came 3 weeks later. It was a letter from Carol on official HOA letterhead. It was dismissive and condescending. She wrote that the board had consulted with their landscape contractor, who had assured them the work was a necessary upgrade to improve drainage for the entire community. She stated that my credentials, while perhaps impressive in the past, were not relevant to the current needs of Creekwood Estates. She then had the audacity to claim that the standing water on my property was likely due to my own neglect of the drainage easement, and she attached a formal notice of violation, giving me 14 days to clear the obstruction from the culvert on my land, or face a daily fine of $50. She had no idea the culvert wasn't obstructed. It was simply overwhelmed by the volume of water she was illegally directing into it. I did not argue. I did not write back. I simply paid the first fine. A check for $50, mailed to the HOA. I made a photocopy of the check and the violation notice. I placed the copies, along with her letter, into the green folder. I paid the next fine, and the next. For a month I mailed a $50 check every day. It was an investment. By accepting my checks, cashed and deposited by their treasurer, they were creating a paper trail that acknowledged the dispute and their role in it. They were unwittingly documenting their own malfeasance. Each canceled check was a receipt, another page for the file. On paper, it would look like I was complying with their demands while the damage continued, which would only strengthen my position later. On paper, they were the ones extorting money from a neighboring landowner over a problem they themselves had created. The folder grew thicker, and all the while, the pasture grew wetter. The second willow tree began to sicken. It was the one Helen had been proudest of, the one with the trunk that twisted just so. That was when my patience began to wear thin, not my anger, my patience. There is a difference. Anger is an emotion, patience is a resource, and my supply was running low. This brings us back to that morning, with Carol standing on my drowned land, ordering men to dig it up further, threatening me. It was a flagrant escalation, a move from bureaucratic harassment to active physical trespass and destruction. It was the catalyst. After she delivered her ultimatum, I simply nodded, turned, and walked back to my house without another word. I could feel her eyes on my back. I could sense her smug satisfaction at my perceived retreat. She thought she had one. She thought I was a feeble old man who could be intimidated. She had no idea I was going to my desk to get to work. The first thing I did was not to call my lawyer. It was to call my surveyor. Frank. We'd worked together for 30 years. He was semi-retired too, but he kept his license active for interesting jobs. Frank, I said, I have an interesting job for you. I explained the situation briefly. He was quiet for a moment and then let out a low whistle. Artie, you always find the good ones, he said. They altered the hydrology without a permit and are blaming you for the runoff. Classic. What do you need? I need a full boundary and topographic survey of my property, concentrating on the lower pasture, I said. I want every elevation marker, every contour line. I want you to locate the exact position and invert elevation of the culvert on both ends. And most importantly, Frank, I need a title search and a full report on the chain of title for that drainage easement. Record of Survey Book 42, page 18, filed in 1978. You want me to see who owns the paper, he said. It wasn't a question. I want you to prove who owns the paper, I corrected, and I need it fast. While Frank got to work on the survey and title search, I retreated to my home office. The green folder was now a green accordion file, bulging with documents. I took everything out and laid it on my large drafting table, the original easement grant, the development plans, my photographs of the illegal modification, the log of the flooding, Carol's threatening letter, the copies of my 32 checks for $50 each, and the corresponding violation notices. The video I had just taken that morning. It was a solid foundation, but it was incomplete. I needed more. I spent the next 2 days in the county records office. It's a place I know well, a second home of sorts. The smell of old paper and microfilm is comforting to me. I wasn't looking for my own records. I was looking for theirs. I pulled the Articles of Incorporation for the Creekwood Estates Homeowners Association. I read their bylaws, their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, their CC and Rs. I spent hours reading the minutes from their board meetings, which, as a public record of the corporation, were on file. It was, as I suspected. Carol ran the board like a personal fiefdom. The minutes show that the decision to improve the retention pond was made without a formal vote. The minutes simply stated, the president reported on plans to address community drainage concerns. There was no record of an engineering consultation, no record of a permit application with the county watershed district, which was required for any alteration to a primary drainage system. The only documentation was a series of invoices from Carol's Custom Landscaping, a company I soon discovered was owned and operated by her brother-in-law. The invoices were all approved for payment with a single signature, hers. I photocopied everything, the meeting minutes, the invoices, the Articles of Incorporation. I created a new section in my green file labeled HOA malfeasance. It was a beautiful, clear, and damning paper trail. They had violated their own bylaws. They had failed to obtain the required permits. They had engaged in what was very likely a conflict of interest transaction, awarding a no-bid contract to a family member. They were not just wrong about the water. They were wrong about everything. On the third day, Frank called me. His voice was electric with the thrill of discovery that only a man who loves his work can have. "Artie, you are not going to believe this," he said. "I'm at the county recorder's office. I've been here all day. Are you sitting down?" "I'm sitting, Frank." "What did you find?" "The easement. Record of Survey Book 42, page 18. He said, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "The developer, McGregor, he granted the easement in 78, just like you said. But Artie, he didn't grant it to the future HOA. I felt a slow, cold clarity wash over me. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. He granted it to the county, didn't he?" "Bingo," Frank said. "To Somerset County, for the purposes of public storm drainage. It was standard practice back then, but here's the kicker. I kept digging. In 1994, the county built the big storm sewer system under Ridge Road, the main thoroughfare. It made a lot of the old drainage ditches and culverts redundant. So I checked the county commission meeting minutes from that year." He paused for dramatic effect. "On June 12, 1994, the Somerset County Commission passed Resolution 94-217, formally abandoning a list of public easements that were no longer necessary for the county drainage system. And guess what's on that list?" I closed my eyes. It was more beautiful than I could have imagined. "The easement across my property. As God is my witness," Frank crowed. "They filed a formal notice of abandonment. The easement was legally extinguished. By law, when a public easement like that is abandoned, the rights don't just float in limbo. They revert to the owner of the servient estate. That's you, Artie. That culvert, that land, it's been yours and yours alone, free and clear, for the last 26 years. The HOA has no more legal right to it than they have to the moon. Their documents, their plats, they show new homeowners. They're all based on an original survey that's been legally obsolete for over 2 decades. They've been trespassing, Artie, and you've got the paper to prove it. This was the bombshell. It was the bedrock. It changed everything. It was no longer a dispute about the misuse of an easement. It was about the non-existence of one. Every action they had taken, the modification, the fines, the threats, the trespass that very morning, was illegal. Utterly and completely. I kept the receipts, and Frank had just found the original purchase order for the whole transaction. I told Frank to prepare a new plat of my property, a formal record of survey. It would show the original property lines, the location of the culvert, and, most importantly, a prominent note citing the 1994 county resolution and stating that the easement recorded in Book 42, page 18, was null and void. I wanted it surveyed, stamped, and ready to file. My next step was to craft a new letter. This one would not be polite. It would be precise. It would be a formal cease and desist notice, drafted with the help of my lawyer, whom I finally called and brought up to speed. He was a good man, a specialist in property law, and when I walked him through my green folder, he just shook his head and smiled. "Arthur," he said, "this is the most well-documented open and shut case I've seen in my career. What do you want to do?" "I want them to stop," I said, "and I want them to fix what they broke." The letter was a masterpiece of legal clarity. It listed point by point their transgressions: the unpermitted alteration of a drainage system, the illegal discharge of concentrated stormwater onto private property, trespass, property damage, and the levying of fraudulent fines. It cited the specific county ordinances they had violated. And then, in the final glorious paragraph, it informed them that the drainage easement, upon which their entire justification was based, had been legally extinguished in 1994, and that any further entry onto my property by any agent of the HOA would be treated as criminal trespass. We attached a copy of the county resolution and a draft of Frank's new survey plat. We demanded three things. First, the immediate cessation of all activity on my property. Second, the submission of a remediation plan to be prepared by a licensed professional engineer and approved by me to restore the drainage system to its original 1978 specifications at the HOA's sole expense. Third, a full refund of the $1,600 in fraudulent fines I had paid. We gave them 10 business days to comply. We sent it via courier to every single member of the HOA board, so Carol could not claim she was the only one who received it. Her response this time was not a letter. It was a phone call, not to me but to the sheriff's department. I was in my workshop, cleaning some tools, when I saw the patrol car roll slowly down my long driveway. A younger deputy got out. He looked uncomfortable, like he was already tired of whatever he was walking into. I met him on the porch. Carol was standing at the edge of my lawn, right at the property line, arms crossed, tapping her foot. She had put her yellow vest back on for the occasion. She was performing for the law. "Mr. Miller?" the deputy asked. He was polite. His name tag read Sandoval. "I am," I said. "Sir, I received a call from that woman over there, Ms. Carol Shaw. She's the HOA president. She's claiming you're threatening her and illegally blocking a vital community drainage system." From her position 50 feet away, Carol shouted, "He's going to flood the whole neighborhood. He's a menace." I ignored her. I looked at Deputy Sandoval. "I have not threatened anyone, Deputy, and I have not blocked anything. Would you like to see the culvert?" He nodded, and we walked down toward the lower pasture together. The two workers from the other day were gone, but the damage remained. A muddy, ugly scar on the land. The water in the pasture was high, almost to the mouth of the culvert. "She says you've put up a dam," he said, looking at the pipe. "The pipe is exactly as it has been for 40 years, except for the damage her men did to the inflow," I said calmly. "The water is high because her association illegally modified the upstream system to funnel water onto my property at an unnatural rate. I have asked them to stop. They refuse. The issue is not a blockage here. The issue is an illegal discharge there." I pointed toward their retention pond. Carol, who had followed us at a distance, screeched, "That's a lie. It's an easement. He's trying to extort money from the community. Show him the letter, Arthur. Show the officer your threatening letter." She was convinced our letter was proof of my villainy, not hers. She truly could not comprehend being wrong. "Deputy," I said, turning to Sandoval and lowering my voice, "this is a civil matter, I know, but she has made a specific claim about a drainage easement. That is a matter of property law. I would like to present you with some documents, and I would appreciate it if you would note in your report that you have received them." His eyes, which had been scanning the scene with a sort of weary professionalism, sharpened. He recognized the shift. I wasn't arguing. I was creating a record. "Okay, sir, let's see what you have." We walked back to the house. I invited him inside, into my office. Carol stayed on the lawn, fuming that she couldn't be part of the scene. I didn't hand him the whole green file. That would be overwhelming. I handed him 3 clean, crisp documents. The first was the deed to my property, clearly defining the boundaries. The second was the Somerset County Resolution, 94-217, with the relevant section highlighted. The third was Frank's new, stamped survey plat, showing the non-existence of the easement. He took them and read them. He was a young man, but he was sharp. He read them slowly, then read them again. He looked at the plat, then at the resolution, then back at the plat. He traced the lines with his finger. After a full minute of silence, he looked up at me. He didn't say, "You're right." He couldn't. It wasn't his job, but I saw it in his eyes. A flicker of understanding, a subtle recalibration. The narrative he had been fed by the hysterical woman in the vest was crumbling in the face of quiet, boring, official paper. "So, this document from the county," he said, tapping the resolution. "It says the easement was abandoned." "That is correct, Deputy. It reverted to me, the property owner, by operation of law, in 1994. The homeowners association has no legal standing or rights regarding that culvert or the land it's on. He nodded slowly, his face impassive. I see. He handed the documents back to me. Okay, Mr. Miller. Like you said, this is a civil matter. There's no criminal act here that I can see. We can't force you to allow them access, and we can't force them to do any work. It'll have to be settled in court. He paused. But I will be filing a report, and I will document per your request that you presented me with these items. I'll also note that Ms. Shaw was unable to provide any documentation to support her claim to an easement. He was giving me exactly what I needed. A formal, third-party record of the event, a report from a law enforcement officer stating that I had presented evidence of my ownership, and Carol had presented nothing but unsubstantiated claims. It was another sheet of paper from my folder, a very powerful one. We walked back outside. Carol rushed toward him. Well, are you going to arrest him? Are you going to make him unblock the pipe? Deputy Sandoval held up a hand. Ma'am, this is a civil dispute over property lines and documents. It's not a criminal matter. I've advised Mr. Miller of his rights, and I'm advising you of the same. You need to take this up with your lawyers. For now, I strongly suggest that you and any representatives of the HOA stay off this property until a court says otherwise. His tone was firm, official, and left no room for argument. Carol's face went through a remarkable series of transformations, from triumphant expectation to confusion to sputtering indignation and finally to a mask of pure fury. She stared at me, her eyes promising retribution. She had been publicly contradicted. The neutral authority figure she had summoned to vanquish me had, in his own careful way, sided with the paper, not with her performance. For her, this was an intolerable humiliation, and I knew with absolute certainty that it would trigger her final, desperate escalation. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. I knew she was planning something. My lawyer confirmed that the HOA's counsel had been in touch, a blustering man who parroted Carol's claims about the easement and accused us of terroristic threatening for citing legal code in our letter. My lawyer calmly referred him to the county resolution and suggested he do his own title search. Then, the cavalry arrived. Not for her, for me. The first was Mr. Henderson, from 2 streets over. He was a quiet man, a retired accountant who had lived in Creekwood Estates since it was built. He'd been on the receiving end of Carol's tyranny for years, fined for everything, from a small vegetable patch in his backyard to the unapproved color of his garden hose. He came to my door after dark, holding a shoebox. Arthur, he said, his voice low, I heard what happened with the sheriff. I heard you stood up to her. He looked nervous but determined. I think this might help. He opened the shoebox. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. They were photos of the retention pond and the culvert area, taken over the last 15 years. My wife was an avid bird watcher, he explained. She documented everything, the nesting habits of the geese, the water levels, everything. The photos clearly showed the original, smaller outfall pipe. They showed the normal, dry state of my pasture. They even showed, in one remarkable series of photos, the landscaping crew installing the new, larger pipe. He had a date-stamped visual record of their illegal work. It was invaluable. Why didn't you ever say anything, Bill? I asked him gently. He looked down at his shoes. She can make life difficult. The fines, the letters, it's exhausting. Most of us just want to be left alone. But what she's doing to you, it's different. It's wrong. And you're fighting back. I want to help. He was the fearful ally, his courage finally overriding his exhaustion. I thanked him profusely and added his photos to the file. The next day I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Sarah Jenkins, the treasurer of the HOA board, the disillusioned insider. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice hushed. I can't talk for long. I'm on the board, but I don't agree with what Carol is doing. None of us do, really. but she bullies everyone. We voted her in to manage the budget, not to start a war with our neighbors. She told me that Carol had called an emergency board meeting. She was proposing a special assessment on all homeowners to fund a major lawsuit against me. She was framing it as an existential threat to the community, claiming I was going to dam the culvert and flood all their homes. Sarah was horrified. She paid her brother-in-law $30,000 for that pond work, she said, her voice cracking with anger. There was no other bid. She just did it. And now she wants another $50,000 for a lawsuit to cover her tracks. It's not right. Sarah agreed to forward me the internal emails about the landscaping contract and the proposal for the special assessment. More paper for the file. A coalition was forming, built not on my actions, but on Carol's overreach. The community was beginning to correct itself. Carol's final gambit came the morning of the emergency HOA meeting she had called. It was a notice posted on my front gate by a process server. It was a temporary restraining order. She had gone to a judge, ex parte, meaning without me present, and sworn out an affidavit full of the most outrageous lies. She claimed I had threatened her with physical violence. She claimed I had taken active steps to block the culvert with sandbags in the middle of the night. She claimed my actions presented an imminent threat of catastrophic flooding to the entire neighborhood. The judge, having only her hysterical, perjured testimony to go on, had granted the order. It forbade me from obstructing, altering, or impeding the flow of water through the culvert. It was a brilliant, vicious move. She was using the law itself to force me to accept the flooding she was causing. Under the terms of the order, I couldn't even legally place a grate over the culvert entrance to catch debris. She had weaponized a lie, but it was also a fatal mistake, because to get that order she had to swear an oath. She had to sign her name to a legal document, a statement to the court, a statement that I could now prove with surveyor's plats, with county resolutions, with dated photographs, and with the testimony of a sheriff's deputy, was perjury. She had no idea. She had just handed me the sword. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that smelled of chlorine from the nearby pool. The air was thick with tension. The room was packed. Far more residents than usually attended these things. Carol had successfully whipped up a panic. People were scared. On one side of the room sat Carol's supporters, a small clique of board members and personal friends who looked stern and self-righteous. On the other side, a larger group of residents looked anxious and confused. Mr. Henderson was there, as was Sarah the treasurer, who gave me a small, nervous nod. My lawyer, Tom, sat next to me at a table up front, my green accordion file between us. Carol, standing at a podium, opened the meeting. She was in full performance mode. Her voice trembled with manufactured emotion. She spoke of her duty to protect the community. She painted me as a hostile, unreasonable outsider, a wealthy landowner who cared nothing for the safety of their families and the value of their homes. She held up a copy of the restraining order like a holy relic. "This man," she said, pointing at me, "wants to flood your basements, to destroy your property, all out of spite. He has left us no choice. The board is proposing a special assessment of $500 per household to fund the legal battle to secure our drainage rights and protect our homes." A murmur went through the crowd. $500 was not a small amount. People started looking at each other, their fear now mixed with financial anxiety. When she finished, my lawyer stood up. "Madam President," Tom said, his voice calm and resonant, cutting through the emotional haze she had created. "My client, Arthur Miller, would like to address the homeowners." Carol sneered. "This is a meeting for members only. He has no standing here." "Actually," Tom said, holding up a copy of the HOA bylaws Sarah had sent me, Section 4.2 states that any issue involving a special assessment must be open to comment from all affected parties. As your proposed lawsuit directly targets my client, he is, by your own rules, an affected party. Carol's face tightened, but she was trapped by the very rules she claimed to champion. She gestured dismissively toward me. Fine. He can speak. But we have a court order. There's nothing to discuss. I did not go to the podium. I remained seated. I spoke from my chair, my voice even and clear, forcing the room to quiet down to hear me. My name is Arthur Miller, I began. I have lived on the property next to you for 40 years. I am a retired civil engineer specializing in stormwater management. I am not here to argue. I am here to present you with facts, documents, the things that, in the end, are all that matter. Tom stood beside me. He took the first document from the green file. Exhibit A, he said, his voice booming like a game show host, which I found oddly amusing. He placed it on a document projector, and an image of the 1978 easement grant filled the screen behind Carol. This is the original easement. It was granted by Mr. Miller not to you, the HOA, but to Somerset County. He replaced it with the next document. Exhibit B. This is Somerset County Resolution 94-217. It shows the county legally abandoning that easement 26 years ago. As of that date, the HOA has had zero legal rights to the culvert or my client's land. A low gasp went through the room. People were leaning forward, reading the text on the screen. Carol's face was a mask of disbelief. That's not possible, she stammered. Our documents. The developer's documents were accurate in 1978, Tom said smoothly. Yours are 26 years out of date. A simple title search would have revealed that. He put the next document up. It was Frank's new survey. Exhibit C. A current stamped survey of my client's property, confirming the easement is void. This will be filed with the county tomorrow morning. The room was silent now. The residents were no longer looking at me with fear. They were looking at Carol with confusion, with dawning suspicion. Now let's talk about the water, I said, taking over from Tom. For a year, your HOA, under the direction of President Shaw, has been illegally discharging concentrated storm runoff onto my land. This is the result. Tom placed Mr. Henderson's photographs on the projector, one after another. A clear visual timeline of a dry pasture, turning into a swamp. These actions were taken without county permits, in violation of watershed regulations. Next, the invoices from Carol's Custom Landscaping. These actions were also taken at a cost of $30,000, paid to a company owned by President Shaw's brother-in-law, without a competitive bidding process, in likely violation of your own bylaws regarding conflicts of interest. Sarah, the treasurer, stood up from her seat in the audience. That's true, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I have the emails to prove it. Carol ordered me to pay the invoice without a full board vote. Carol shot her a look of pure venom. Her composure was beginning to crack. You're out of order, Sarah. This is a lie. We ignored her. The final document went up on the screen. It was a copy of the sworn affidavit Carol had submitted to get the restraining order. Tom had highlighted several sentences in bright yellow. The claims that I had threatened her. The claims that I had physically blocked the culvert. And finally, Tom said, his voice now cold and hard, we have this. A sworn statement, made to a judge containing information that is demonstrably false. We have a sheriff's deputy who will testify that he saw no blockage. We have video evidence of President Shaw herself on my client's property, ordering her men to alter the drainage. This document is not just false. It is very likely perjury, and we will be presenting it, along with all the other evidence you've seen tonight, to the district attorney's office tomorrow. That was the moment. That was the turning point. The word perjury, it hung in the air, heavy and sharp. It was no longer about fines and bylaws. It was about crime, about jail. Carol's face, which had been flushed with anger, went completely white. The mask didn't just drop. It shattered. For the first time, she looked small. She looked like what she was, a bully who had been caught, a performer whose stage had just collapsed beneath her. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at the screen, at her own seigned lie, magnified for all her neighbors to see. She had no idea, and now, finally, she did. The collapse was total. The meeting descended into chaos. People were shouting questions at Carol, who stood frozen at the podium. The motion for the special assessment was voted down in a deafening chorus of nays. A motion was made from the floor to recall Carol as president. It passed almost unanimously. She stumbled away from the podium and fled the room without another word. The verdict, when it came, was not one single event, but a series of quiet, satisfying clicks as the machinery of order reasserted itself. My lawyer filed a motion to dissolve the temporary restraining order. At the hearing, we presented our evidence. Carol's lawyer, after reviewing our documents, advised her to drop the matter. The judge dissolved the TRO and, in a rare move, took the extra step of issuing a formal warning to Carol about filing frivolous and potentially perjurious claims. He ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees for the hearing. Click. The district attorney's office did not press criminal perjury charges, deciding it was better handled in civil court. But my lawyer did file a civil suit against Carol personally and against the HOA for property damage, trespass, and slander of title. Faced with the mountain of evidence in the green folder, their insurance company settled almost immediately. The settlement covered the full cost of hiring an engineering firm to design a proper remediation, the physical work of restoring my pasture, the removal of the 2 dead willows and the planting of new ones, and a complete refund of the fraudulent fines. Clearer. The HOA, under new leadership headed by Sarah Jenkins, was contrite and cooperative. They rescinded dozens of Carol's petty fines against other residents. They rewrote the bylaws to require multiple bids for any project over $5,000. The entire tone of the neighborhood seemed to change overnight, from one of suspicion and anxiety to one of quiet relief. Mr. Henderson was appointed head of the new Architectural Review Committee, and the first thing he did was approve his own vegetable garden. Click. The remediation work took 2 months. A team of professionals, their work reviewed and approved by me at every step, removed the oversized outfall pipe from the retention pond and installed one of the correct, original size. They regraded the area around my culvert, repairing the damage Carol's men had done. It rained heavily the week after they finished. I stood at my kitchen window drinking my coffee and watched the water flow gently through the culvert, just as it was designed to. The lower pasture absorbed the moisture, but it did not flood. The water moved on, down to the creek, in an orderly, predictable fashion. The balance had been restored. Carol and her husband put their house up for sale a month after the meeting. The story of her spectacular downfall, fueled by her own hubris and my meticulous records, had become neighborhood legend. No one was sad to see her go. The last I heard, they had moved 2 states away. I imagine she is, at this very moment, volunteering for the welcoming committee in some new subdivision, sizing up the power structure, looking for her next stage. I sit on my back porch now, sometimes, in the evenings. The new willow trees are small, but their leaves are green and healthy. The pasture is firm underfoot. My green folder is back in its cabinet, but I don't need to look at it. The evidence is all around me, in the quiet rustle of the leaves, in the dry ground, in the peaceful silence where threats and accusations used to be. It was never about winning. It was about correcting an error. It was about restoring order. Carol saw the world as a stage for her will, a place where the loudest voice and the most aggressive posture determined reality. She was wrong. The world is governed by quieter, more steadfast things, by the laws of physics that dictate how water flows downhill, by the property lines drawn in ink on a surveyor's plat, by the recorded words in a county resolution that can lie dormant for decades, waiting for someone to simply go and read them. She thought ownership was about power. I know that it is about stewardship, about responsibility, and, most of all, about having the paper to prove it. I kept the receipts, and in the end, the bill came due, and I finally have my peace. That, more than anything, is the victory.